At 6:12 on an August morning in 1986, smoke came low across Bryan County, South Carolina, so thick it erased the fence lines before it erased the sun. By noon, the Cane Ridge Fire had already eaten more than 2,800 acres of pine, broom sedge, and dry pasture. The forestry men blamed lightning. The old-timers blamed the drought, but most of the town blamed a swamp. More exactly, they blamed the 71-year-old farmer who had refused to drain it. Silas Merritt stood beside a sagging wire gate with ash collecting on the brim of his hat. One hand rested on the hood of a 1952 Oliver 88 diesel tractor, faded green under 30 years of dust and repair. The tractor was slow, loud, and unimpressive to anyone who cared about new equipment. Silas cared about whether a machine kept pulling when the ground turned mean. Behind his north pasture sat 38 acres of blackwater marsh. Cypress roots twisted out of it like knuckles. Frogs screamed in it at night. Mosquitoes rose from it in gray clouds after rain. To the county, it was wasted land. To Silas, it was the only part of the farm that still told the truth. For years, people had told him to drain it. A timber buyer offered him enough money to replace half his equipment. A contractor promised he could turn the marsh into straight soybean rows before the next planting season. A banker from Camden named Grant Weller showed him charts, yields, loan options, and a clean little map where every crooked wet place had been corrected. Silas listened every time. Then he said no. People at Holloway's Cafe laughed about it for years. They said Silas farmed like a man trying to offend progress personally. His ditches bent around wet spots instead of cutting through them. His fields curved where every other field ran straight. He planted willows along low ground nobody else wanted. He kept shallow ponds hidden behind switchgrass, and he protected that marsh like it was family. By the summer of 1986, the laughter had changed into anger. The county was dry enough for a boot heel to crack the soil. Pine needles had turned brittle in the woods. Every gust of wind carried embers farther than anyone wanted to admit. The fire had already crossed 2 abandoned logging tracks west of the Merritt farm, and radio stations told families to keep livestock trailers ready. Grant Weller drove out to Silas's place just after lunch on August 4th. He stepped from his blue Ford Bronco, wearing polished boots that sank half an inch into the damp soil near the gate. "You still haven't cut a fire break?" Grant asked. Silas was tightening a chain on the Oliver's drawbar. "Already have one," he said. Grant looked toward the marsh and actually smiled. It was not a kind smile. "That?" he said. "Silas, if you had drained that mess when I told you, we could put 2 dozers through here and make a proper line." Silas wiped his hands on a red shop rag. "They won't need to." A volunteer firefighter standing near the road laughed into his glove. Grant laughed louder. "You think mud is going to stop a wildfire?" Silas looked past him, toward the brown smoke rising behind the pines. "No," he said. "I think water will." That made them laugh harder. Silas did not answer. He climbed onto the Oliver, pressed the starter, and let the old diesel rattle awake with a deep, uneven thunder that shook loose ash from the fender. Then he drove straight toward the marsh while the sky went copper over Bryan County. By late afternoon, the fire changed its mind. That was how the firefighters described it later, because they had no better language for what they saw. Flames that had been running hard through dry broom sedge reached the Merritt boundary and dropped. Not everywhere. Not across the whole county, just there. West of Silas's place, pine trees still exploded in columns of orange. Hay bales burned from the inside out. A feed shed collapsed so fast that the tin roof folded like paper. But along the north side of the Merritt farm, the fire bent low and slow. The grass smoked. It hissed. Then it dyed black in a ragged line that did not move. Grant Weller stood with two forestry men near the road and watched the flames crawl through wet brush no faster than a tired man could walk. "That can't be right," one of the men muttered. But it was right. It was wet. For 32 years, Silas Merritt had been building a farm that held water instead of getting rid of it. His shallow ditches did not rush runoff away, they slowed it. His willow rows did not make neat sense from the road, but their roots pinned the soil and shaded the low ground. His little holding ponds caught water during winter storms and leaked it back slowly through summer. And the marsh behind the north pasture kept the underground table higher than any neighboring field. A county soil survey from 1975 had noted it in one dry sentence. The Merritt North acreage retained subsurface moisture roughly 14 inches above adjacent improved farmland. Silas remembered that sentence. Nobody else did. Most people think fire belongs only to heat and wind. But a field burns according to what it has been allowed to keep. Dry land gives flame speed. Damp land gives flame argument. Silas had spent half his life making sure his land could still argue. By midnight, 4 farms west of Cane Ridge Road had burned hard. Fence posts glowed red at the base. A tobacco barn built before the Second World War was gone. 2 tractors melted where they sat under a tin lean-to. But the Merritt place remained green in a strange, crooked shape, like a handprint pressed into ash. The next morning, trucks lined the road. Reporters came from Camden. Forestry officials walked the boundary with measuring flags. Men who had mocked the marsh stood silently with their arms folded, staring at the wet black edge where fire had simply run out of confidence. Grant Weller found Silas under the machine shed, sharpening a mower blade. "You knew," Grant said. Silas kept the blade against the stone. "I remembered." "Remembered what?" Silas set the blade down and looked toward the marsh. 1954. Brush fire came out of the west after 3 dry weeks, burned to my father's pasture, and stopped in that low ground for 2 days. Rain finished what the marsh started. Grant did not answer. That was the first time the marsh stopped looking like a mistake. 3 days later, the Cane Ridge fire finally died after burning nearly 9,600 acres across the county. Insurance losses passed $6 million. Aerial photographs showed black timber, gray pasture, and one stubborn patch of green wrapped around the Merritt farm like an old secret. But one man still would not accept it. The contractor who had tried for years to drain the marsh, Wade Pritchard, cornered Silas inside Holloway's Cafe on August 11th. Farmers were packed into every booth, talking about fencing, feed, insurance, and who still had cattle missing. Wade slapped a newspaper photo onto the counter. "You got lucky," he said. Silas stirred sugar into his coffee. "Could be. Wind shifted, fire lost fuel, happens all the time." A few men nodded, because luck was easier to swallow than being wrong. Wade pointed toward the photograph. "You expect people to believe a swamp saved your farm?" Silas looked around the cafe. "No," he said. "I expect them to believe what they saw." Wade snorted. "You wasted 38 acres to protect frogs." Before Silas could speak, Grant Weller stood from a booth near the back. "No," Grant said quietly. "He protected water. The rest of us borrowed against dry land and called it improvement." Nobody laughed after that, because every man in that cafe understood the insult hidden inside the truth. Silas had not beaten the fire with luck. He had beaten it with patience nobody respected, until patience became the only plan left standing. Have you ever been right so early that everyone mistakes it for foolishness? Not because you guessed, not because you were stubborn for the sake of being stubborn, but because you remembered something the world had become too busy to notice. Silas Merritt lived that way for most of his old age. He never used words like ecology. He never called himself a conservationist. He did not talk about systems. He talked about ground. Ground keeps a receipt, he used to say. You just don't always know when it means to collect. 2 weeks after the fire, the receipt came due a second time. On August 24th, thunderstorms broke over Bryan County just before dawn. Nearly 5 inches of rain fell before noon. Normally, people would have celebrated rain after a fire. But burned soil can turn cruel. Extreme heat bakes the surface hard. Instead of drinking water, the ground sheds it. Rain races downhill carrying ash, silt, fence debris, and everything that used to be a field. By evening, the farms west of Cane Ridge Road were flooding. Ditches overflowed. Culverts plugged with blackened brush. Calves bawled from shrinking patches of high ground. A county road vanished under muddy water so fast that a school bus left parked beside it looked like it had been abandoned in a pond. The Merritt farm did not stay dry. That was not the miracle. The miracle was that the water knew where to go. It moved first into the willow cuts, then into the shallow side ditches, then into 2 holding ponds Silas had dug in the late 1960s with the same Oliver 88 and a borrowed drag pan. Then, when the ponds filled, the water spilled slowly into the marsh instead of roaring across the fields. The whole farm behaved less like a farm than a patient machine. At dawn, Grant drove through standing water to reach Silas's place. He found the old man already on the Oliver, headlights glowing pale through the rain, a chain looped around a feed trailer. "Wade's cattle are trapped behind Miller Creek," Grant shouted. Silas nodded once. "I know. You going?" Already hooked, they worked for 7 hours in water that reached the top of their boots, then their knees, then their thighs. Twice, a newer lightweight tractor bogged down and had to be abandoned near the fence line. The Oliver did not move fast. It did not look graceful. But its heavy frame held the ground, and the diesel pulled with the slow, ugly certainty of a thing built before comfort became a selling point. That morning, horsepower did not matter as much as refusal. Silas hauled calves, feed sacks, 3 stranded children, and 1 exhausted old hound named Blue out of flooded pasture. He opened his south field for neighbors' livestock. His daughter Ellen made sandwiches in the farmhouse until she ran out of bread, then served biscuits split with cold ham because there were still wet men coming through the door. Wade Pritchard arrived last. His pickup had died in the floodwater half a mile away. He walked in carrying a wet toolbox and wearing the look of a man who had rehearsed an apology but lost every word of it. Silas met him by the barn. "Got room for 26 head?" Wade asked. Silas looked toward the field. "Put him by the sycamores." That was all. No lecture, no victory, no reminder of the cafe. Some silences punish a man better than anger. For 3 days, Bryan County lived inside rain. Local radio told people to boil water. The sheriff's department moved families out of low homes. Helicopters dropped feed to isolated cattle. And every hour, more people came to the Merritt farm because it was the one place that had not collapsed into panic. The University Extension Office sent 2 agricultural engineers on August 29th. They expected to find luck arranged like science after the fact. Instead, they found a working watershed. They measured soil moisture in the north pasture. They traced the ditch curves. They paced the willow rows. They found the hidden ponds. One engineer stood near the marsh edge with his clipboard turning soft in the damp air, and finally said, This place is doing what half the county paid machines to undo." Grant heard him. So did Wade. Silas only leaned against the Oliver and looked embarrassed. News spread fast. Newspapers ran photographs of the burned county, the floodwater, and the crooked green Merritt farm that had survived both. State officials came. Conservation people came. Farmers who had once laughed now parked at the gate and asked if Silas would show them how the water moved. He showed them, but he never performed for them. He would point with a wrench. "That ditch is too straight. It'll hurry water." Or he would kneel, pick up a clod of black mud, and squeeze it. "See that shine? That's last winter still in there." In October, Grant Weller came back with an offer from a regional land trust. They wanted to pay Silas $162,000 for conservation rights to the marsh. Ellen wanted him to consider it. Grant thought the money would let him retire with dignity. Silas looked through the kitchen window at the cypress tops. "If I sell the promise," he said, "somebody will someday hire a lawyer to explain what the promise didn't mean." Grant had no answer for that. The truth was, Silas did not trust paperwork as much as he trusted habit. Paper can be revised. A habit can root itself into the next person. That winter, the state invited him to speak at an agricultural meeting in Columbia. Silas almost refused because he hated microphones and hotel carpets with equal sincerity. Ellen made him go. Grant drove him there. On February 7, 1987, Silas Merritt stood in front of more than 100 farmers, bankers, drainage contractors, and county officials. He wore a clean denim jacket and held his hat in both hands. He did not give a speech like a professor. He told them about the 1954 fire. He told them about the flood after Hurricane Gracie when his father walked the low pasture with a lantern. He talked about willow roots, cypress shade, slow ditches, and why water should sometimes be delayed rather than defeated. When he finished, nobody laughed. Not one person. By the early 1990s, several counties in the region were encouraging voluntary wetland buffers on working farms. Extension agents used the Merritt property as a field example when talking about water retention and firebreak behavior. Grant Weller changed his lending rules and stopped financing drainage conversions without environmental review. He lost clients over it. He said he had already watched the cheaper lesson burn. Wade Pritchard changed too, slower than Grant, but more honestly. He still owned drainage equipment. He still liked straight lines, but he stopped calling every wet acre useless. By 1993, he and Silas were drinking coffee together at Holloway's every Thursday morning. Once, a young farmer asked Wade what changed his mind. Wade looked out the window at the courthouse square and said, "I thought progress meant making land obey. Silas showed me land lasts longer when you let it answer back." Silas hated praise like that. "Land showed both of us," he said. The Oliver kept running through all of it. Every winter, Silas changed the oil himself. Every spring, he checked belts, injectors, bearings, and the old cracked seat. Paint flaked from the hood. The steering wheel shined smooth where his hands had polished it over decades. When the engine started, children in the yard would turn their heads because the sound had become part of the farm's weather. Silas Merritt died on November 18, 2000, at 85 years old, after spending the previous afternoon repairing fence wire near the Marsh. Ellen found mud on his boots and grease under his fingernails. At the funeral, Grant Weller spoke. So did Wade Pritchard. Neither man made the story about being proven wrong. They made it about being taught gently by someone who had every right to be harsh and never used it. After the service, nearly every truck drove slowly past the marsh before leaving, like people were paying respects twice. Years later, Ellen still kept the Merritt farm working. She accepted a preservation agreement only after the language made reversal nearly impossible. Students came to study the water system. Young farmers came to ask about curved ditches. And every fall, she drove the Oliver through the harvest parade, with children waving from a hay wagon behind it. Grant Weller walked beside the tractor one year when a boy asked why that old machine mattered. Grant rested his hand on the fender. "Because it pulled when everyone was wrong," he said. But that was only part of it. The tractor mattered because Silas mattered. The marsh mattered because memory mattered. The crooked ditches mattered because not every useful thing announces itself in a straight line. People still talk about the Merritt farm in Bryan County when August turns dry and smoke begins to bruise the horizon. They talk about the old man who protected frogs, mud, mosquitoes, and trees long enough for all of them to protect him back. Because some things only look worthless while the world is still comfortable. Then the day comes when everyone needs exactly what they laughed at.